So I want you to picture the following scenario. Alice deploys a trading bot, i.e. a software program, on a cryptocurrency trading platform. Now her trading bot is coded to purchase the cryptocurrency Bitcoin every few hours at the best available price on the platform. Alice's bot is a deterministic bot. It's not an AI bot. But what I mean by that is that her bot is programmed to follow instructions set in advance by the programmer. It's not making independent decisions of its own. Now Bob also deploys a deterministic bot on the platform, and Bob's bot is coded to sell Bitcoin, and the way it does that is it looks at other offers to sell Bitcoin on the platform to determine the price at which it will sell Bitcoin. But if there are no other offers to sell Bitcoin on the platform, then it will sell Bitcoin at an extremely inflated price. Now, an error occurs on the platform in the middle of the night, and that prevents some of the biggest sellers of Bitcoin from selling on the platform. So the number of offers to sell Bitcoin starts drying up. Eventually, it dries up completely, and Bob's bot, seeing that there are no other offers to sell Bitcoin on the platform, sells Bitcoin at the extremely inflated price. And Alice's bot, seeing that that's the best available price on the platform, automatically accepts that offer and ends up purchasing Bitcoin for 250 times the market price. So my first question for you is, should Alice be held to that contract, or should the contract be unwound? And my second question is, would it make any difference to your answer if the trading bots were AI bots instead of being deterministic bots? Now, over the course of the next 10 minutes, we're going to attempt to answer both of those questions in order to illustrate how AI is capable of stretching certain legal rules to breaking point. So in order to determine whether Alice should be held to the contract, our starting point is a rule known as unilateral mistake. And essentially what that rule says is if at the time of entry into the contract, party A was mistaken about a term of that contract and party B knew of this mistake, then the contract is void. A simple example of that is if I'm selling something to someone else, but I misquote the price of that thing, and the other person knows that I've made a mistake in doing so, then unilateral mistake will be engaged, and the contract will be void. Now, our Alice-Bob scenario presents two difficulties for the doctrine of unilateral mistake. First, has Alice made a mistake that's capable of engaging the doctrine? And second, since the contract was entered into by trading bots in the middle of the night, how can it be said that Bob knew of the mistake at the time of entry into the contract? Now we're first going to consider this through what I'll call the easier scenario, which involves deterministic bots. And then I'm going to swap out the deterministic bots for AI bots and deal with the hard scenario involving the AI bots. So let's start with the easier scenario involving deterministic bots. Now this did actually happen in a very famous Singaporean case called B2C2 and Coin, and I'll be talking you through how the Singapore court approached some of these questions. So dealing with our first question, which is, did Alice make a mistake that is capable of engaging the doctrine? Courts have traditionally distinguished two types of mistake. First, there's mistakes about terms, and second, there are mistakes about circumstances. Giving you a simple example, if I misquote the price of something to someone else, that's me making a mistake about a term of the contract. On the other hand, if I give that person the correct price, but I incorrectly think that that price reflects the market price, then I've made a mistake about the wider circumstances rather than a specific term of the contract. The way the Singapore court approached this in this Alice-Bob scenario, and by the way, I've obviously changed the names, it said Alice hasn't made a mistake about a term of the contract because Alice's trading bot acted exactly as it had been programmed to. Instead, it said that Alice had made a mistake about the circumstances. They said Alice had a mistaken belief that her bot would be buying Bitcoin at prices which corresponded with the market price. The relevance of that distinction is that in certain legal systems, only a mistake about a term will be sufficient to engage the doctrine of unilateral mistake, and that includes England. In Singapore, there's potentially a wider doctrine of unilateral mistake, which may allow for a wider category known as fundamental mistake, and mistakes about circumstances like the one identified by the Singapore court in respect of Alice might be sufficient. An alternative way of considering this question is to not focus on that distinction between mistakes about terms and mistakes about circumstances, but it's instead to say, as some commentators have argued, that a mistake by a trading bot is just not capable of engaging the doctrine of unilateral mistake at all. The argument goes like this: a trading bot is a tool used by Alice to create an undetermined open offer to enter into trades on whatever terms her bot agrees. So even if her bot agrees to a very disadvantageous trade, that doesn't matter because Alice made an undetermined open offer to enter into that trade. And the way that this argument is justified is that Alice is actually in the best position to implement safeguards in advance to protect herself from these sorts of scenarios, and she should bear the risk of failing to do so. But for now, we'll assume, just for argument's sake, that Alice has made a mistake that engages the doctrine. So then the second question is, does Bob have knowledge of the mistake at the time of entry into the contract? Now you have to remember here that the contract was entered into by trading bots in the middle of the night. Bob was asleep. So the only entity that really had knowledge of, could have possibly have had knowledge at the time of entry into the contract was the trading bot. But how can a trading bot, especially a deterministic bot, know or intend something? So option 1, which was the option taken by the Singapore court, was to say, since this is a deterministic bot, which is following the instructions set by the programmer, we should look at the knowledge or intention of the programmer of Bob's bot. And the question it asked was the programmer, by inserting that extremely inflated offer into the code of the bot, doing so with the knowledge that that offer would only ever be accepted by a mistaken party? Essentially, was the programmer trying to take advantage of future parties' mistakes in that kind of scenario? And the court found on the facts that the programmer didn't have a sinister motive in including that inflated offer in the code. It was actually just a protective mechanism. Now, because of that finding, the contract was upheld. Some people might think that that result is unfair, and there was a dissenting judge in B2C2 and Coin, who is Mance IJ, who held that we should focus instead on the outcome rather than the intention of the programmer. And he essentially asked, would a reasonable trader who had known of the trade at the time and had also known of the true market price of Bitcoin at the time, known that this trade was definitely the result of a mistake? And if the answer to that question was yes, essentially if someone was faced with the outcome and would have known that that outcome was definitely the result of a mistake, then the knowledge requirement could be satisfied and unilateral mistake would apply and the contract would be void. So pausing there, we can see that even in the easy scenario, the answers are not that straightforward. Now, if we swap out the deterministic bots for AI bots, we can see that the problems get compounded. Let's move on to the harder scenario, which involves AI bots. Now, the key difference between a deterministic bot and an AI bot is that with a deterministic bot, the bot is following decisions that are specified in advance by the programmer. On the other hand, an AI bot, which makes use of machine learning, can be taught certain basic principles initially by its creators, but then over time it can gradually refine and adapt its approach. And there are 3 complexities that follow from that. First, the bot can make independent decisions. Secondly, the bot can independently develop over time. And thirdly, as the bot becomes more complex, it might be impossible even for its creators to explain why the bot has come to a particular decision. And that third problem is known as the black box problem. So let's reimagine our original scenario, but this time with AI bots. So Alice and Bob both deploy cryptocurrency trading bots on a cryptocurrency exchange platform. The bots are not explicitly programmed to act in a certain way, but instead trade based on strategies that they have refined over time. A platform error occurs in the middle of the night, and somehow Alice's bot enters into a trade with Bob's bot where Alice's bot purchases Bitcoin for 250 times the market price. So looking at that first question again, which is, has Alice made a mistake that engages the doctrine of unilateral mistake? You'll recall that when we were looking at this in the context of deterministic bots, the Singapore court reasoned that there was no mistake about a term because Alice's bot had acted exactly as it had been programmed to. But with AI, things are a little more complex because the bot is acting independently and therefore is capable of acting unpredictably and therefore may not have acted in the way that Alice intended for it to act. So then the question is, well, can Alice then argue that there is a mistake about a term because her bot has acted unpredictably? But that creates a loophole because anyone who uses an AI bot might be able to say that they shouldn't be bound where the bot acts unpredictably. So instead, you might want to say that for those who use AI bots, they should bear the risks of their bots acting unpredictably, and they're not able to say that there's a mistake about a term, or even a mistake at all, in circumstances where their bot has acted unpredictably. But let's assume again, for the purposes of argument, that Alice has made a mistake that's capable of engaging the doctrine of unilateral mistake. So the next question is whether Bob has knowledge of Alice's mistake at the time of entry into the trade. Now you'll recall with deterministic bots, the focus was on the knowledge or intention of the programmer, and that made sense because the deterministic bot is following decisions that have been made in advance by the programmer. That might not make sense in the context of AI bots though. So for example, the ability of Bob's bot to offer Bitcoin at an extremely inflated price to Alice's bot might not have been intended or designed by the creators of Bob's bot. It may have been a result of independent development of the bot over time. So if you're limited only to looking at the knowledge or intention of the programmer, then in circumstances where an AI bot has acted unpredictably, there would just be no room for unilateral mistake to operate. So you could move the focus to Bob's bot itself and ask whether it knew about the mistake or intended to take advantage of the mistake. There are a few problems with that though. Firstly is the black box issue, which is it might be impossible to determine why the bot has acted in the way that it did, even for its creators. That will depend on the particular bot in question, because some bots can be designed from the outset based on principles like explainability and transparency, which may allow you to overcome the black box problem to a degree. But even if you can overcome that black box problem, there's a more fundamental issue here, which is what do concepts such as knowledge or intention or unconscionability mean when applied to software or an AI system? These are human-centric concepts, and so either we're going to stretch their meaning very widely in order to apply them to these systems, or we might need to define new mental states for software systems. So seeing that there's a problem with focusing on the intention of the programmer, and also there might be issues with focusing on the intention of the bot, the third approach, which follows Mansaij's approach in Coin, which you'll recall was to focus on the outcome instead. So the question here is, looking at the outcome, i.e. the trade for Bitcoin at 250 times the market price, would a reasonable trader know that this was definitely the result of a mistake? And you'll see that sidesteps the issue of the black box, because you're not having to focus on the intention or knowledge, whatever that may mean, of the system. And also it allows for unilateral mistake to operate even when a bot has acted unpredictably, because you're not restricted only to looking at the intentional knowledge of the programmers. You're focusing instead on the outcome. But the downside of widening the doctrine of unilateral mistake in this way, by allowing for focus on the outcome, is that you might undermine the certainty of transactions, because this rule essentially allows for contracts to be unwound. So as you can see, there's no right answer to these issues. There are arguments for and against each of these approaches, and ultimately it's a matter of weighing up legal certainty, justice, and the coherence of our legal systems. The Alice and Bob scenario does illustrate a wider issue or challenge that's presented by AI, which is many of our legal tests, which are focused on guiding human action and focused on the idea of humans being decision makers, may not be applicable where software is capable of taking independent action and humans are arguably removed from the picture. If you found this interesting, I explore these issues in a lot more detail in an article that'll be linked in the description. And if you like this sort of content, then please do follow me on LinkedIn or YouTube for more. Thanks very much for watching.